Here's a question that should be simple, but somehow isn't. If your job is stable, why does it still feel heavy? Like, not dramatic heavy, not I'm being mistreated heavy. I mean that quiet weight you feel on Sunday nights when the week hasn't even started yet. You're not scared you'll get fired tomorrow. Your paycheck hits on time. The benefits are decent. Your manager is fine. And still, your chest tightens a little when you think about doing this exact same week again. Because deep down, you can feel the trade you're making. You're trading risk for predictability. You're trading uncertainty for a routine you can survive. And that trade can be smart. Sometimes stability is oxygen. But if you stay in the wrong stable job for too long, the cost isn't obvious. It doesn't show up on your paycheck. It doesn't show up in your LinkedIn headline. It shows up years later, when you realize your life got smaller while you were being responsible. That's what we're talking about today, the hidden cost of staying in a stable job too long. My name is Robert. If you've ever felt stuck in a job that looks good on paper but feels heavy in real life, hit the like button and subscribe. It tells me to keep making these psychology of money and career videos. And I've spent an unhealthy amount of time studying why smart, hardworking people stay stuck in jobs they've outgrown, how security quietly turns into a cage, and why the real risk is often not leaving, it's waiting. Today, we're going to talk about the psychology of stability. We're going to talk about opportunity cost in a way that doesn't feel like a business textbook. We're going to talk about the invisible math of your career. And then we're going to land on a practical, non-extreme way to think about change, so you don't have to choose between reckless and trapped. Because most people think the career problem is simple. You either have a good job or a bad job. You either stay or you leave. You either play it safe or you take a risk. But that's not how real life feels. Real life is a gray zone. Most people aren't stuck in a nightmare job. They're stuck in a fine job. And fine is the most dangerous place to be. Because fine doesn't create urgency. It creates delay. And here's the mid-video gut punch. Most people don't ruin their careers with one big mistake. They lose years to "I'll deal with it later." If you've been telling yourself that, keep watching, because the rest of this is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. If you're miserable, you move. If you're thriving, you stay. But if you're fine, you postpone. And postponing feels responsible, until you realize postponing has a price. Let's name the first misunderstanding. Most people think the cost of staying in a stable job is the salary. They think, if I leave, I might make less. So they compare two numbers, current salary versus potential salary. And that seems logical. But career decisions are not just about income. They're about trajectory, about optionality, about identity, about whether your skills are compounding or decaying. And if you only look at the paycheck, you miss the real math. Here's the real math. If a job is stable, but you are not growing, the cost is not what you lose today. The cost is what you never get later. It's the version of your future that disappears quietly. No email, no warning, just a slow narrowing. And the reason this is so hard to notice is because the brain is terrible at detecting slow loss. The brain reacts to sudden pain. It does not react to gradual drift. That's why people can gain weight slowly. That's why relationships can fade quietly. That's why careers can stagnate while you still feel busy. Because you're not doing nothing. You're working. You're performing. You're showing up. So it feels like progress. But being busy is not the same as becoming more valuable. And that difference matters. So let's define opportunity cost in human language. Opportunity cost is what your life could have earned if you didn't choose the option you chose. It's the alternative future you never lived. And when you stay too long in a stable job, the opportunity cost isn't always some fantasy where you become a millionaire. It's usually much simpler. It's the missing promotion, the missing skill, the missing network, the missing confidence, the missing leverage. It's the fact that you don't just lose 1 year, you lose the compounding of that year. And this is where the career math starts to look like investing, because careers compound, not in a cute motivational way, in a brutally literal way. Your skills compound, your reputation compounds, your network compounds, your confidence compounds, and also your stagnation compounds, your fear compounds, your comfort compounds, your avoidance compounds. So if you stay 1 extra year because you want to be safe, you're not just buying safety, you're also buying another year of being the same version of yourself. And that can be fine, unless you're already feeling the itch, unless deep down you know you're shrinking. Now, before we go further, I want to say something clearly. Staying in a stable job is not automatically a bad decision. If you have a season where stability is the priority, that's wisdom. If you're supporting a family, if you're caring for someone, if you're rebuilding, if your health is fragile, stability can be oxygen. The problem is not choosing stability. The problem is using stability as a permanent excuse. The problem is staying by default. Because when you stay by default, you stop making an active choice. And when you stop making active choices, your life becomes something that happens to you. That's when stability turns into a cage. So why do smart people stay too long? Usually it's not laziness. It's not a lack of ambition. It's psychology. It's the way your brain evaluates risk. Because your brain does not evaluate risk objectively. Your brain evaluates risk emotionally. It asks, how painful would it be if this goes wrong? And then it tries to prevent pain. That's all. So let's talk about the specific mental traps that keep people in stable jobs. First trap, the stability premium. A stable job feels valuable because it reduces uncertainty. And uncertainty is exhausting. When you've lived through layoffs or student debt or a shaky economy, stability feels like winning. So you overvalue it. Not because you're irrational, because you're tired. Stability gives your nervous system a break. And once your nervous system gets that break, it will fight to keep it, even if the long-term cost is huge. Second trap, sunk cost. You've already invested time. You've already built a reputation there. You've already learned the systems. You've already survived the learning curve. So leaving feels like wasting all that effort. But here's what people forget. The sunk cost is already sunk. The only question is what you do with the next year. Because staying doesn't protect the past. Staying just adds more time. And if the next year looks the same as the last year, you're not protecting anything. You're just extending the plateau. Third trap, identity. This one is quiet. A stable job can become part of who you are, not just what you do. Your family is proud. Your friends think you're set. You know how to explain it at parties. It sounds adult. It sounds responsible. And leaving would mean admitting that you're not as stable as you look. Leaving would mean becoming a beginner again. And beginners feel awkward. So people stay in a role they've outgrown because being advanced at something familiar feels safer than being new at something better. Fourth trap, the fear of regret. A lot of people don't stay because they love the job. They stay because they're terrified of leaving and then failing. Because then they would have to face two pains, the pain of the situation and the pain of self-blame. I had it good and I ruined it. That sentence keeps people stuck for a decade. Now, here's the part I want you to hear. The real risk is not leaving and failing. The real risk is staying and slowly losing yourself. Because that loss is hard to see. It's not dramatic. It doesn't crash your life in one day. It just drains your energy. It makes you less curious, less sharp, less ambitious. It makes you stop believing you can change. And once you stop believing you can change, your world gets smaller. That is the hidden cost. So let's quantify it. Not perfectly, but in a way that makes it real. Imagine two people. Same age, same starting salary, same ability. Person A stays in a stable job for 10 years. They get predictable raises, let's say 3% a year. Person B takes a calculated step out after 3 years. Not a reckless leap, a move to a role where their skills grow faster, where the learning curve is steeper, where the pay jumps sooner. Maybe person B gets a 15% bump, then another 15% a couple years later. Not because they're smarter, because they put themselves on a faster compounding track. Now, if you look at year 1, person A looks safer. If you look at year 2, person A looks safer. If you look at year 3, person A still looks safer. This is why people stay, because the stable path wins early. But compounding doesn't reward early comfort. Compounding rewards being on the right trajectory. So by year 8, the gap is huge. Not just in salary, in confidence, in options, in the kind of work they can access, in the kind of people who return their calls, in the kind of life they can build. And here's the brutal part. Person A might not even feel like they made a mistake. They did what everyone calls responsible. They stayed loyal. They stayed stable. They avoided risk. And yet, the outcome can still be a quiet form of regret. Not regret like crying on the floor. Regret like a dull ache, a feeling that something is missing, that you have more in you, that you're capable of more, and you just never cashed it in. Now, let's make this even more human, because opportunity cost is not only money, it's energy, it's time, it's your prime learning years. It's the window where you can take risks and recover. And that window closes faster than people think. Not because you get old, because you get responsibilities. A mortgage, kids, parents, health. Your margin shrinks. Your risk tolerance drops. So ironically, the longer you wait to make a change, the harder it becomes to change. That's why stable jobs can become sticky. They aren't just comfortable, they slowly remove your ability to move. So what's the turning point? The turning point is realizing that stability is not a destination. Stability is a tool. It's something you use to build. And if you're not building while you're stable, you're consuming your stability. You're spending it. You're treating it like the end of the story. But stable seasons are supposed to fund growth, not replace it. So the mindset shift is this. Instead of asking, is this job stable? Ask, is this job making me more valuable? Because stability without growth is just a slow leak. And growth doesn't always mean a promotion. It can mean learning. It can mean building a skill stack. It can mean taking on projects that stretch you. It can mean building relationships outside your company. It can mean making your resume stronger every 6 months. Because if you're going to stay, you need to extract value from the stay. You need the stay to produce leverage. Otherwise, the stay produces complacency. Now, let's talk about the practical part. How do you know if you're staying too long? Here are a few signals that are hard to argue with. 1. Your weeks look identical. Different tasks, same feeling. Same problems, same conversations, same stress. No new challenge that makes you sharper. 2. You're not learning anything you'd be excited to teach someone. 3. Your job feels like maintenance, not growth. You're keeping things running, but you're not expanding. 4. You daydream about other paths, but you don't take any action. You research, you scroll, you watch videos, you fantasize. And then you go back to the same Monday. 5. You've become overly attached to the comfort. You're not staying because you love it, you're staying because leaving would make you feel anxious. That's a sign your nervous system is in charge. Now, what do you do about it without blowing up your life? This is where people get stuck because they think the only options are quit tomorrow or stay forever. But there's a third option. Build optionality. Optionality is the ability to change without panic. It's having choices, and choices reduce fear. So the goal is not necessarily to quit. The goal is to become the kind of person who could quit. Because once you could, you stop feeling trapped. And when you stop feeling trapped, you make better decisions. So here's what building optionality looks like. You start treating your career like an investment portfolio. Not in a cold way, in a realistic way. You diversify your skill set. You build relationships outside your company. You keep your resume warm. You do one project a quarter that makes you more valuable in the market. You save an option fund. Not an emergency fund, an option fund. Money that buys you the ability to say no, the ability to walk away, the ability to take a risk without feeling like you'll drown. And if you do that consistently, something changes. The stable job stops being a cage. It becomes a base, a platform. And when it's a platform, staying is no longer fear. Staying becomes strategy. Now, I want to say something that might be uncomfortable. Some people use stable job as a way to avoid confronting a deeper fear. The fear is not, what if I fail? The fear is, what if I try and I realize I'm not as capable as I tell myself? That fear is ego pain. So people choose stability to protect identity. They'd rather be the competent person in a role they've mastered than risk being mediocre somewhere new. But that's also how people end up with a life that looks good and feels empty. Because mastery without meaning starts to feel like boredom. And boredom, long enough, turns into quiet depression. So if you're feeling that, you're not lazy. You're under-challenged. Now, let's bring this home with a story. Imagine someone named Chris. Chris is 36. Chris has a stable job. It pays $85,000. Chris is good at it. People trust Chris. But Chris has been in the same role for 6 years. At first, that stability felt like relief. Chris had finally stopped worrying about bills. Chris could finally breathe. But year 4 is when something changes. Chris stops learning. Not because Chris is dumb, because the job stops asking for growth. So Chris starts coping. More scrolling. More, maybe I'll switch later. More fantasizing. More telling themselves they should be grateful. And then a new hire shows up. Younger, hungry, curious. They ask questions. They bring new tools. And suddenly, Chris feels threatened. Not because the new hire is better, but because the new hire reminds Chris of who Chris used to be. And that moment is painful because it shows the cost. The cost wasn't money. The cost was momentum. So Chris makes a small change. Not quitting, not a dramatic leap, a small change. Chris starts building optionality. One skill, one connection, one project, one course, one application, one conversation. And after 6 months, Chris notices something. The job feels less heavy. Not because the job changed, because Chris is no longer trapped. Chris has a runway. And a runway changes the entire emotional experience of work. When you have a runway, work is just work. When you don't, work feels like your whole life. That's the difference. So let's close with the message I wish more people heard. Stability is not the enemy. Stability is valuable. But stability without growth is expensive. It costs you future versions of yourself. It costs you leverage. It costs you options. It costs you compounding. And the tragedy is that you don't feel the cost until later. So if you're in a stable job right now, ask yourself one honest question. If I stay here for 2 more years, will I be more valuable or just more comfortable? Because comfort is not a plan. Comfort is a feeling. And feelings change. Bills change. Markets change. Companies change. So the goal is not comfort. The goal is resilience. The goal is optionality. The goal is becoming the kind of person who has choices. And once you have choices, stability stops being something you cling to. It becomes something you use. Progress beats perfection. Consistency beats intensity. And if you're going to play it safe, make sure you're not confusing safe with stuck. And if you want more scripts like this that mix money, psychology, and real life, subscribe, because I'm going to keep making them. And if you've got a story about the moment you realized your job was stable but not growing, drop it in the comments. I read those.